Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
Christopher Schaefer is our next presenter. Among many other accomplishments, he co-founded the Center for Social Development at Emerson College in England, as well as an international organization and community development consultancy group called the Social Ecology Associates. He's now teaching at Sunbridge College in Spring Valley, and his paper is titled Dialogue of Social Creation, Rudolf Steiner and the Beloved Community.
Well, thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts maybe about Rudolf Steiner and the Beloved Community, which is a unique, in many ways unique, imagination, story, picture of human beings' relationship to each other and to the natural world. It's important because it provided the basis for the civil rights movement in this country, which, in my view, is the most important nonviolent movement for social change in American history. And if you really think about what the Black population went through, and you ask yourself how it was possible to engage in this 300-year history to be recognized as fully equal human beings in a largely nonviolent movement, then you have the beginning of kind of a connection to the importance of this imagination of interdependence, of interbeing, as it was then developed by Thich Nhat Hanh and the Buddhist movement. Now, I come to this question really, again, because I'm an older person. And it's a great opportunity to explore a question that has been part of my life since I was born. Because I was born in Germany in 1942. So I still experienced the residue of war, of destruction, of the Holocaust, of Nazism, which was part of my past. And that went in, not consciously, of course, but then I was in Berlin when the wall was built. By chance, I got there 3 days before the wall was put up. And so I experienced another kind of confrontation. And then I was teaching down the road at MIT, international politics, and I was participating outside of my own department's building because the Department of Political Science was engaged in the Strategic Hamlet program. So for me, this question of our inhumanity, of our violence, of our destruction of nature, of our lack of equity toward each other, has been really a kind of life question. And it led me to also become engaged with Steiner's work, because I realized in the end, the only way to produce a healthy society is to have a healthy human being. And therefore, education, and in particular, Waldorf education, was going to be central. So then I spent the next 30 or 40 years, 50 years, working in organizations and communities as an advisor, as a consultant, partly engaged in conflict resolution work. But now coming again to this question, I had done an analysis in the recent years about the US Empire Project and the ideology of oppression and what we were doing abroad. And then I finally thought, it's not enough to identify the evils that are going on in the world. I have to find something, some imagination, some picture of the human being in relationship to other human beings that can offer a basis for peace, for transformation. And it was at that point that a friend of mine told me about a book called Brothers in the Beloved Community. Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin, the friendship of Thich Nhat Hanh and Martin Luther King. And it really touched me and moved me because it described that in 1913, a professor of philosophy here at Harvard developed a view about Christianity. And the book and the lectures were called The Problem of Christianity. But what he did is he added the notion of community to the two commandments of loving God with all your heart and mind and loving your neighbor as yourself. He said, we also need to be concerned about the human community and our connection to the larger community. And of course, the archetype that he drew from in the Christian tradition was that of Christ and the disciples at the Last Supper. And then he talked also about the betrayal of the community. Again, in the Last Supper of Judas going out and betraying Christ. And he says, we all carry a moral burden. And the moral burden is that we, with our prejudice, with our egotism, with our selfishness, we betray the beloved community. We betray the community that we are connected to. We betray the human community. We betray the natural community, and we betray the divine community. I want to just briefly trace the history. So Josiah Royce wrote this book. It was picked up by the nonviolent communities in Britain and the United States, the nonviolence movement against war, because of the enormous destruction of World War I, and then later, of course, of World War II. In particular, the Fellowship for Reconciliation connected itself, picked up this imagination of the beloved community and made it the basis of its work on behalf of nonviolence. And it was through their work, and in particular, A.J. Muff and Howard Thurman, Howard Thurman introduced the imagination of the beloved community to Martin Luther King Jr. And he then, began to articulate this interconnection of human beings. Some of you will remember the letter from a Birmingham jail where he talks about all human beings are tied in a network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever happens to one indirectly happens to all indirectly. And also in many other speeches, he talks about this, even in I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. He talks about the connection. Now, for him, it was still limited. And through what happened is he developed a friendship with Thich Nhat Hanh because Thich Nhat Hanh was studying in this country, already a well-known Buddhist scholar, but he contacted Martin Luther King and he said, will you help me basically denounce the war in Vietnam? Will you help me? And they came together and they did have a news conference in Chicago, and then later met again in Switzerland. And it was in the meeting in Switzerland where Martin Luther King talked to Thich Nhat Hanh and asked him to work on behalf of the imagination of the beloved community. He died not much, he was assassinated not much later. And many years later, Thich Nhat Hanh said, I honored my promise to Martin. I worked on behalf of the beloved community in my peace work with the Vietnamese boat people, in my projects in Vietnam, in Plum Village, and in all of my retreats. And then he added, he was asked, are you in touch with Martin Luther King Jr.? And he said, yes, I'm in touch with him and with the Buddha and with the Christ being and with many other spiritual beings and with the dead in an ongoing way. So he broadened, Thich Nhat Hanh broadened the imagination of the beloved community really to all life forms, including women as equals, because Martin Luther King had not included women. So to all life forms and to the living and to the dead, the unborn, to all spiritual forces and entities, and of course to nature. And that imagination has spread through our culture, through the whole movement of engaged Buddhism, but also with Krista Tippett and many poets and writers. That imagination is part, also it lives strongly in the environmental movement, seeing nature as a subject, not an object. And in the work of scientists like Robin Wall Kimmerer and others at Brady Sweetgrass, there is a kind of emerging sense of the interconnection of all life forms and that life in its present form is based on love and reciprocity, on mutuality, not competition only. So I set out really to interest you in three questions. Yeah, the imagination of the beloved community. To what degree anthroposophy is, in all of its aspect, a description of the beloved community? That all of Steiner's work can be seen in biodynamics, in Waldorf education, in esoteric development, in inner development, in his picture of macrocosm and microcosm, really as a description. And I'll say a little bit more about that. And then lastly, that I think is a really underappreciated aspect of Steiner's work, which is, can we see social life as a whole? Can we see our relationships? Can we see conversation and encounter? Can we see our life in community and institutions as a mystery school, as a place of initiation? Steiner, I think, describes it that way. Not only one place that I found directly, but in his descriptions about what actually happens in social life, it is that. How much time do I? I'll just indicate very quickly a few things about anthroposophy and Steiner's work. Maybe the most important is, what is the foundation stone meditation actually? Can it be seen as a gift to human beings to meditate our own nature in connection to both the natural world and the divine world? Is it not a meditation of the beloved community? What is the calendar of the soul but a description of how we live within the context of nature and its rhythms and our own inner life? What is the threefold social order but a way to give meaning and structure to our experience of the beloved community? I will turn, because of time, well, I'm going to read you my take on the beloved community, based not only on Martin Luther King, but on Thich Nhat Hanh's work. That you and I participate in a human and life world that is interconnected by the web of destiny, so that what happens to each being has an effect on the other, and that indeed the nature of all life is meaningful and relational. That what we think, feel, and do affects the other and the balance of moral and spiritual forces in the world. That the world of interbeing extends beyond the human community to include all of nature. It includes the dead and the unborn. It includes the great spiritual teacher of humanity, and indeed all soul and spiritual forces and beings of which our universe is composed. That since we are born in community and become human in community, that we're capable of both building and maintaining the beloved community, as well as destroying it. The freedom of our self-consciousness in the modern consciousness soul age expresses itself in this choice that we make every moment of our life. Thank you. That working for justice, equality, peace, and the health and sustainability of all life is inherent in the imagination of the beloved community. The imagination of the beloved community impels us to engage in nonviolence, to recognize the evil that is embedded in the use of violence, that to do the hard work of the hard inner work of love, as John Lewis called it, requires inner work and contemplation and prayer to transform our own being. And indeed, that the purpose of human life is to learn to love, to consciously give back to the world what it is that we have received. I'm just going to quickly mention some of the things that Steiner talks about at some length, in particular in Awakening to Community, but not only, that suggests that the social world is the modern mystery school. He talks about the archetypal social phenomena as being human conversation and dialogue, out of which the entire social world is produced. There's nothing that exists in the social world except the coming out of dialogue. And that we create the social world. The divine world is God-given, but we create the social world. And so I'll come back to this thought. So it depends, what is the image we have of human life and of our own nature? That is the single most important thing, I believe, out of which we create. If we create the social world, if we think of life as competition, life is the exercise of power, life is getting our way, which is what we have in our society today, then we will create a highly destructive, manipulative world. But if we begin to recognize that we are here because of the love that human beings, our teachers, and so on, have had for us, then a different world is possible. So, conversation is the archetypal social phenomena. Our first true experience of the spirit is in dialogue with other human beings. It's in conversation that we experience social and antisocial forces. We meet our own prejudice and egotism, and we meet the possibilities of interest in each other, of empathy toward each other, and of love toward each other. Above all, and this is Steiner's great contribution to modern life, I think, the reality of our mutual karma. Steiner's work on human relationships and on destiny, I think, is one of his greatest contributions to modern humanity. And working with that means all of social life is the beloved community. And he adds, he says, Christ is becoming the Lord of karma. Conversation's also a dialogue with the gods. It's where we actually experience the reality of threefold social order. It's the desire for freedom, mutuality, equality, and of course, the path that others have mentioned. I want to add that a poem not by an anthroposophist, but I think that describes this quality of the beloved community. It's a poem by Rosemary Watola Trummer. Though I respond to my name, I am aware how completely the love of others has made me who I am, how the work of their hands is more me than the swirl of my own fingertips. I am the project of love, the product of compassion, the sum total of kindness and sympathy. Of course, the cruelty too, of course, the ugliness, the shame, but it is love that rises in me. Like yeast in the living bread, it is love I've received that stands where I stand, when I stand, love that responds when you say my name. It expresses the gratitude that we can have when we recognize how much of what our life is the gift of others, of what they have made possible for us. And that is expressed in this uniquely American imagination description of the beloved community that has been carried so deeply in the civil rights movement and in the environmental movement. And I think anthropology is, in every aspect of its being, is an elaboration and a description of that imagination. Thank you.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.